Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going way back to 2011 when we were given our first glimpse of Far Cry 3 in action at E3, and we'll see how much of that showcase managed to make its way into the final retail build of the game. For this comparison, we're using Ubisoft's footage from the E3 event and comparing it to the current Steam release of the game running at 1440p, and with all of the graphics cranked all the way up to the max value. Now we'll start this video with the awesome monologue from the game's main antagonist Vaas. Here we can already see some significant improvements in the retail version of the game to the character model, including improved textures, increased detail, specular lighting, improved shadow quality, and higher contrast. Effects like Vaas's facial hair are more pronounced, and the facial animations look more natural. What's interesting is that the actual backdrop of the scene has been changed drastically. We have different trees and at different distances, a different vehicle parked in the back, and a different character model with different animations for that nearby soldier. The E3 version of the game seems to have an increased amount of vegetation, but this is likely done for the sake of drawing more attention to the action, rather than a limitation of the hardware at the time. There's plenty of areas in the final game that have even more dense vegetation than the sequence, so it's interesting that they even made these changes at all. Vaas's animations seem to be identical throughout the entire monologue, and the player's camera movement seems to match all the way down to the point where he's pushed into the well. Now after this initial cutscene, things start to change significantly. We still emerge from a waterfall, but instead of a patrolling guard walking from right to left on the other side, we have a guard standing completely still on the left in the final release. In the final release, we also have an APC drive by in the distance, which is related to the mission itself, but this is not included at all in the E3 material. After killing the guard, we see Jason looting the body and immediately equipping an AK-47. This is not possible in the final build. Not only do you need to loot the body and pick up the weapons separately, but this guard is never equipped with an AK-47 and will always have a pump shotgun instead. After we equip our weapon, we turn around to take in the beauty of the waterfall. But here's where we start to see an actual significant downgrade in quality. I love the contrast in color of the retail game, but this E3 version of the waterfall looks much better, with volumetric mist hiding the imperfections at the edges of the fall, and multiple layers to give it a more believable look. The layout of the surrounding area has also been altered, though it's not clear why. In the E3 build, there's a small ruins off to the side of the path, but in the final build, we have a pair of guards looting some bodies. Now these guards appear in the E3 build, but they're further down the road and off to the left and can be completely bypassed. After taking the elevated path to the right, we can see the nearby enemy outpost along with a helicopter that we need to escape with. In the E3 demo, the helicopter is already waiting on the helipad, but in the final release, the helicopter actually flies in from overhead, which I think looks cooler. And we can also see a much bigger, wide open area in the E3 demo, with guards doing things like throwing corpses into the nearby river. But in the final build, things are more claustrophobic. The bridge is much smaller and funnels in between two large hills, blocking our view of the helipad, and there's no guards throwing bodies into the water. There's less buildings to hide behind when dropping down onto that first guard, and there's no guard sitting in a chair to throw a knife at. This animation for killing a guard, stealing his knife, and throwing it at a nearby guard is actually in the final build, and we used it earlier for the sake of this comparison. During the actual fight, it's difficult to replicate the action in the E3 demo for a couple reasons. For one, the guards are more spread out. There's a few snipers and even an RPG soldier that makes firing from one of these elevated positions difficult. An APC blocks a large line of sight in the center of the outpost that's not there in the E3 demo, and ammo is seriously limited thanks to there only being one soldier with an AK-47 along the path we took. But you can still blind fire like in the E3 build, and it works identically, which is awesome. But what I find interesting is despite all the major changes to the area's layout, the game looks way better in the final version of the game. The gun models look sharper and more defined. There's significantly less screen tearing, though that could be attributed to some complication with their presentation. Sound design has been improved drastically, and enemy character models are more detailed. I do wish the guards in the final game weren't all wearing bright red shirts all the time. I like the look of the guards in the E3 build with just red bandanas with white shirts, but I can see why this was changed for the sake of gameplay. After the blind firing scene, we see the characters sprinting towards the river and diving in to avoid gunfire. In the E3 demo, we see some of the bodies that guards were throwing in floating underwater, but obviously this is not the case in the final build. Once the player emerges on the other side of the river, he turns to shoot some barrels and blows up the bridge to stop enemy reinforcements. Not only are these barrels missing, but there's no way to achieve this level of destruction in the final build anywhere. And even if there was, there were only like 3 enemies back on the other side of the bridge, so cutting them off would have been pointless. I tried sprinting straight to the helicopter like they do in the demo, but this is really difficult to pull off in the full release, even on easier difficulties. So it's likely the E3 demo fudged the damage to the player so that they weren't dying during the presentation. I tried sprinting straight to the helicopter like they did, but there's just too many enemies and even a large armored guy waiting at the helicopter itself. Once on board the helicopter, the scene plays out identically to the demonstration, with Jason forcing the pilot to take off and an RPG hitting the rear rotor and forcing the chopper to crash. But the crash location has been altered slightly, and so has Voss. In the E3 demo, Voss comes straight towards Jason from far away, holding an AK-47. He kicks Jason's weapon away and simply looks at him with crazy eyes after repeating the famous line.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
But in the final release, Voss appears from the right side of the screen, already holding Jason's pistol, or at least an identical one. He walks up to Jason and steps on his hand and delivers the same line, only this time he stands back and shoots Jason in the chest to end the scene. So what's our takeaway here? Did Ubisoft pull another fast one on gamers back in 2011, or did they deliver on their promise? In my opinion, I think they far exceeded what they originally showcased. Sure, the environment wasn't identical to the gameplay they showed us, but it seems like it was done for the sake of making the segments more difficult, especially considering it takes place much later in the game's story. There's several more difficult enemies spread around like snipers, RPGs, and even a heavy, meaning they really wanted to try and challenge the player here rather than just regurgitate the same action sequence that was advertised. I'm not quite sure why they removed the destructive bridge or reduced the visual fidelity of that waterfall, but overall, the game plays just as promised and it still looks phenomenal to this day. But what do you guys think? Did you like the original E3 demo better? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more content posted every week.